In the gaslit streets of Victorian London, 4 heroes race against time to stop a shadowy foundation's plan to awaken an ancient horror. Tonight we follow Nathaniel, Will, Victoria, and Isabel as they battle, armed only with their wits and the unbreakable bond of human spirit, against forces that would devour the world. This is Victorian Cthulhu, Episode 8, The Somnus Codex, Part 2. The basement of the Chapel of St. Joseph had been transformed from a sacred space into something far more sinister. Gas lamps mounted along the stone walls cast flickering shadows across a dozen medieval cages, each containing a figure whose head hung in defeat or quiet despair. The air was thick with the scent of dampness and fear, broken only by the occasional cough or muffled prayer from the imprisoned. Nathaniel Milbane sat on the cold stone floor of his cage, his back against the iron bars, observing their fellow captives with the methodical eye that had served him so well during his years at Scotland Yard. Wilchester occupied the cage adjacent to his, the young engineer's jacket torn from his earlier struggle with their captors. A purple bruise darkened the side of Will's jaw, but his eyes remained alert and defiant. "How long do you think we've been down here?" Will whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant sound of footsteps on the floor above. Nathaniel consulted his pocket watch, one of the few possessions their captors had allowed him to retain. 3 hours, perhaps 4. It must be long past midnight. Their fellow prisoners sat in various states of resignation. Nathaniel recognized only one of the faces, the occultist Ambrose Fenwick, his usual imperious demeanor replaced by a haunted stillness. The others he did not know, but each was dressed in fine clothing. Likely all had been at the Foundation gala, he deduced. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the stone stairs. Lillian Langley's stern face appeared first in the pool of gaslight, followed by a figure who commanded immediate attention despite his unassuming entrance. The man who descended into their prison possessed the bearing of nobility so ingrained that it seemed to emanate from his very bones. In his mid-60s, he moved with the careful grace of one accustomed to authority and respect. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his dark suit expensive but understated, and his pale blue eyes held an intelligence that was both compelling and utterly cold. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of the upper classes, "and ladies, please forgive the circumstances of our meeting. I am Solomon Pike, though some of you may know me by my more formal title, Lord Salford. My foundation, the Suscitat Foundation, has a need for your talents. I deeply apologize for the inconvenient way we brought you here." "Finally," the voice of Ambrose Fenwick echoed with subdued fury through the room. "You have the courage to show your face. Whoever you are, you will pay for this travesty." "Miss Langley," Lord Salford continued, paying Fenwick no heed, "please see that our guests are provided with water and what food we can offer. They have had a trying evening." Langley nodded briskly. "Of course, Lord Salford. Shall I begin taking them down to the vaults for preparation?" "In due time. But first, please have chairs brought for our 2 extra guests, as they have a little longer to spend in their cages." His gaze moved to Will's injured face with what appeared to be genuine concern. "And do see that Mr. Chester's injuries are attended to. There is no need for unnecessary suffering." Will and Nathaniel exchanged glances as guards appeared with wooden chairs, unlocking their cages just long enough to position the furniture before securing the iron doors once more. Both men recognized the futility of resistance at this moment, surrounded by armed men in an underground chamber with no obvious means of escape. Lord Salford settled himself in a chair of his own, positioned directly in front of Nathaniel. His manner was that of a professor beginning a lecture, or perhaps a priest preparing to deliver a sermon. "I am aware," he began, speaking as one might to a friendly rival, "of your considerable efforts to uncover the motives and methods of our foundation. Indeed, I must commend you, Mr. Milbane, and your associates on how remarkably well you succeeded. Few have come so close to understanding our purpose." Nathaniel found his voice. "Your purpose being the random abduction and imprisonment of innocent people?" "Innocent, maybe, but hardly random. Lord Salford's smile was warm, almost jovial. "You have encountered some of our artifacts during your investigations, have you not?" "The objects recovered during privately funded expeditions some 30 or so years ago?" "I am aware of them," Nathaniel replied carefully. "Excellent. Then you will understand that we are dealing with forces and knowledge that predate human civilization by eons beyond counting." Lord Salford paused, his pale eyes taking on an almost evangelical fervour. "In the deepest parts of the ocean, far beneath the waves where no mortal light has ever penetrated, is bound an entity of such immense power that it dwarfs the gods of human mythology as a mountain dwarfs a pebble. Will, despite his circumstances, could not suppress a small act of defiance. If this creature is so powerful, how did something else manage to capture and bind it in the first place?" Lord Salford glanced at him with the sort of patient expression reserved for a student who had asked an obvious question. "Your henchman makes an astute observation, but one that misunderstands the nature of the binding." "I am not a henchman. I am an engineer." Will spoke more to himself, as Salford seemed lost in his words. The great Lord Cthulhu was not defeated by some greater force, but rather chose to enter into the deep sleep that restores his strength across the vast cycles of cosmic time. His slumber is more akin to preparation than imprisonment. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop as Lord Salford spoke the alien name, and several of the captives stirred uneasily in their cages. For countless ages this mighty being has been calling out to mankind, seeking those with the sensitivity to hear his voice and assist in his awakening. During his rest, his children, his spawn, have been slowly ascending from the ocean depths, rising like dreams made manifest to herald their father's return. Lord Salford paused, allowing his words to settle over the captives like a shroud. "The artifacts you have encountered were sent forth as gifts, each one bestowing upon its wielder a fragment of ultimate power. The shard, as you witnessed, grants dominion over the dead. A second artifact, which our good Dr. Harvey has been employing so effectively, allows its user to bend the minds of weaker men to their will. Remarkable abilities, are they not?" Nathaniel's blood chilled as he thought of Dr. Harvey's influence over Professor Blackwood, a great intelligent mind so easily controlled. "But these gifts," Lord Salford continued, "remarkable though they may be, are merely, how shall I put it, window dressing, trivial displays compared to their true purpose, for within each artifact lies the power, when coupled with the proper ritual knowledge, to accomplish two things of genuine significance." He stood, beginning to pace before the cages like a lecturer warming to his subject. "The first ritual brings a vault of the dream spawn to the surface, creating a sacred space where the barriers between our world and theirs grow thin. You have had the honour, though perhaps you did not recognize it as such, of witnessing two of these vaults. One lies beneath the stone circle at Little Wickham, and the other exists here, directly below where we now sit." "And the second ritual?" Nathaniel asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Ah, the second ritual is far more complex, and I confess we have met with limited success in our attempts. Dr. Harvey arranged for Professor Blackwood to attempt it at Little Wickham. We did not truly expect him to succeed, it was more in the nature of a test, but by all accounts he performed admirably and came remarkably close to completion." Lord Salford's expression darkened slightly. "Thaddeus Wren's attempt here was most unfortunate. That was not something we sanctioned, you understand. Poor Wren broke ranks, so to speak, attempted the ritual of his own accord, and paid the price for his recklessness." Nathaniel made a point of keeping his tone neutral. "You did not answer my question, the purpose of the second ritual." "Our great Lord Cthulhu has dreamt for many ages. During that time he has created spawn, children if you like. Each artifact holds the power to awaken one of his 7 spawn. Each will come forth as a herald to the awakening of the great Lord himself." "How do you come to know so much about these rituals?" Nathaniel demanded. "Knowledge, Mr. Milbane. The artifacts hold immense power, but the true strength comes from understanding. Lord Salford gestured to Langley, who had been standing silently by the stairs. "Miss Langley, would you ask Dr. Harvey to bring our most precious resource?" A few moments later, Dr. Harvey appeared. He glided in and nodded politely. "Gentlemen, Lord Salford." In his hands was a tome that obviously was ancient. It had the throbbing resonance that, to Nathaniel, was very much like the one of the shard. "There exists," Lord Salford said reverently, "a text of such profound significance that it contains within its pages all the knowledge and power that mankind might ever require. It is called the Necronomicon, and scholars have spent lifetimes seeking even fragments of its wisdom. What you see before you is the Somnus Codex, a transcript of just a small portion of that greater work, specifically the section that details the rituals necessary to release the dream spawn and prepare the way for our Lord's awakening. The Codex tells us that powerful tributes will ensure the rituals will succeed. It is very detailed on the subject." "You mean sacrifices," Nathaniel said flatly. "If you prefer that term, 13 individuals possessed of sensitivity to the immense power of the human spirit. Initially, we believed such people posed a threat to our plans and sought their elimination. But we have since realized that by using them as tributes instead, we not only remove a potential obstacle, but provide ourselves with the most effective offerings possible." Lord Salford's gaze moved to an empty cage where a 13th captive should have been. "Lady Strathmore is proving elusive, I grant you, but the ritual can be completed with 12. The risks are acceptable." He turned back to address all of the captives, his tone taking on the cadence of a prophet delivering divine revelation. "The ritual will take place tomorrow evening. The tributes will undergo a process of anointing, a meticulous procedure that will prepare your spirits for their sacred purpose. I suggest you use the intervening hours to rest and reflect. You will bear witness to the dawn of a remarkable new age, the beginning of a future in which humanity takes its proper place in the cosmic order." Lord Salford straightened, his bearing once again that of an aristocrat concluding a social engagement. "The Order of the Sleeping Eye has worked toward this moment for decades. I trust you will appreciate the magnitude of what you are about to participate in. Enjoy your final day, gentlemen, in the world as you have known it." As Lord Salford ascended the stairs, Langley began directing the guards to remove the other captives from their cages. One by one, the spiritually sensitive prisoners were led away to whatever fate awaited them in the depths below, their footsteps echoing in the stone passages until silence fell once more. Nathaniel stared at the empty cages around them, his mind working furiously despite their dire circumstances. "Tomorrow evening," he said, "which means we have perhaps 20 hours to find a way to prevent the end of the world as we know it." "Any suggestions?" Will asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Nathaniel looked up at the stone ceiling, somewhere beyond which lay London, sleeping peacefully in ignorance of the absolute horror that was about to be unleashed upon it. "None whatsoever," he admitted, "but we must try nonetheless." The gas lamps flickered, and in the sudden dancing shadows, both men could almost imagine they saw something vast and tentacled stirring in the darkness between the flames. Isabel's bedroom at her Hampstead house bore the scars of their desperate struggle. Overturned furniture, scattered ornaments, and the lingering scent of supernatural cold served as grim reminders of how close they had come to capture. Victoria sat in a wing-back chair, gingerly touching the tender bruise that darkened her left cheekbone where Adams had struck her. Across from her, Isabel wrapped a shawl more tightly around her shoulders, her ethereal beauty marred by exhaustion and worry. "I cannot stop thinking about them," Isabel said quietly, her grey-green eyes reflecting the dying embers in the fireplace. "Will and Nathaniel trapped at that church." Victoria nodded, wincing as the movement sent a spike of pain through her injured face. Adams seemed so confident they were already secured. "The Foundation has been planning this for so long. They appear to have anticipated every contingency." Both women sat in contemplative silence for a moment, the weight of their friend's capture pressing down upon them like a physical thing. Then Isabel straightened, her expression taking on a familiar look of quiet determination. "I know what we need to do." Victoria looked up expectantly. "What's that?" "What the English always do when faced with such peril," Isabel replied as she stood. "Have a cup of tea." Isabel gave the ghost of a smile. Despite everything, Victoria found herself laughing, a brief, slightly hysterical sound that broke the oppressive atmosphere. "Of course, tea solves everything, doesn't it?" "It may not solve our problems," Isabel said, "but we need to calm our nerves, and I cannot bear to be in this room, surrounded by—" She let the sentence hang. They made their way downstairs to the kitchen. A window here had been broken through, letting in the icy night air. Isabel busied herself with the tea service, her movements precise and comforting in their familiarity. "Bradshaw will be the first of the staff to arrive in the morning," she said, setting the kettle on the range. "He always comes early to ensure everything is prepared for the day. He'll see to the window then." As they waited for the water to boil, both women found themselves facing the overwhelming helplessness of their situation. Victoria slumped against the kitchen table, her usual American confidence giving way to despair. How can we possibly help them? Even if we knew exactly where they were being held, what could two women do against an entire organization? The Foundation has been operating for decades. They have resources, manpower, connections we can't even imagine. And in the middle of the night, how on earth are we supposed to call for help? Isabel poured the hot water over the tea leaves, sighing. "It is ironic that I do have a way of calling for help. I just cannot use it." "What do you mean?" "Well," Isabel said, settling into a chair across from her friend, "my father had me have a telephone installed here last year. He believes it makes me less vulnerable, living alone in the city without family nearby. Our estate in Yorkshire is quite remote, you understand." Victoria's eyes widened. "A telephone? Will would be absolutely fascinated. I've heard about them, of course, but I've never actually seen one. If only we could just call Will now. We really need to find out what's happening." "It's in the study," Isabel said, then her face fell. "Though I'm afraid it won't be of much use to us tonight. The exchange service closes after 7 in the evening, so there's no one to connect calls until morning." They sipped their tea in a worried silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Then, gradually, an idea began to form in Isabel's mind. "Victoria," she said slowly, "I think I have an idea. Maybe we can call Will." Remember Will's spiritual condition was changed after his encounter at the sanatorium, that his spirit sits differently than it should? "Yes," Victoria replied, her interest sharpening. "You said his spiritual essence has been altered by his exposure to supernatural forces. It exists partially outside the normal boundaries of the physical world. And I am a medium. Communication with spirits is my speciality." Victoria's eyes widened as she grasped Isabel's meaning. "You think you might be able to reach him, across the spiritual plane?" "With the Ebon reliquary," Isabel said, growing excited despite their dire circumstances. "We still have it from our encounter with Fenwick. If it can enhance spiritual connections, but using such an object is dangerous. The reliquary carries a taint of the occult. Prolonged exposure could affect my own spiritual sensitivity." Victoria reached across the table and grasped Isabel's hand. "I know this means taking on a large burden, but if there's even a chance we could warn them, could coordinate some kind of rescue." Isabel squeezed Victoria's hand in return. "We have no other choice, do we?" "Then we try?" "Yes, we try." The morning room of Isabel's house had been transformed into something resembling a séance parlour. Heavy curtains blocked the windows, leaving only the warm glow of gas lamps to illuminate the space. Isabel had retrieved the Ebon reliquary from its hiding place, a small black vessel that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the surrounding light. "I've participated in a séance before," Victoria said, taking her seat at the polished mahogany table, "but it wasn't quite like this." "This is very unusual," Isabel admitted, settling across from her. The reliquary sat between them, emanating that peculiar humming vibration that seemed to resonate in their very bones. "Typically, I communicate with spirits who have passed beyond the veil. Will is very much alive. I am hoping his spirit just touches the veil." Victoria closed her eyes and concentrated on Will's image. His warm smile, his practical hands stained with engine oil, the way his eyes lit up when discussing his mechanical innovations. The memory of his protective instincts during their recent adventures filled her with both affection and desperate worry. For a moment she forgot the gravity of the situation and smiled. "Focus on your connection to him," Isabel instructed, her voice taking on the dreamy quality that marked her spiritual workings. "Think of moments when you felt closest to him, when your spirits seemed to touch." The reliquary's hum grew deeper, more insistent. Victoria felt a strange tingling in her fingertips where they rested on the table's surface. The air in the room grew thick, charged with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand on end. "I can sense something," Isabel murmured. "A presence that feels familiar. Wait, there's interference. Other voices, other minds." In the basement of St. Joseph's Chapel, Will looked up from his contemplation of the iron bars surrounding him. "Nathaniel, do you hear that humming?" Nathaniel, who had been examining the lock mechanism of his cage, paused in his work. "It is non-stop here, though it seems stronger now, like a deep, pulsing throb." "No, not that," Will said, pressing his palms against his temples. "This is different, higher pitched, almost like buzzing, and it sounds like someone's calling my name." Nathaniel straightened, his detective instincts immediately alert. "Calling your name? No, that is not what I hear." But Will had already closed his eyes, his face taking on an expression of intense concentration. The world around him seemed to fade, replaced by something that felt like floating in warm, grey mist. "Will? Will, can you hear me?" The voice was unmistakably Isabel's, though it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Isabel," he said aloud, causing Nathaniel to move closer to the bars separating their cages. "Thank goodness. Victoria, it's working. I've reached him." "Will, are you all right? We've been so worried." "I'm fine," Will said, his voice strange and distant even to his own ears. "Both Nathaniel and I are unharmed. We're being held in the basement of St. Joseph's Chapel, in iron cages." "How are you managing this? Are you safe?" "We're using the Ebon reliquary," Isabel's voice explained. "After Adams and his men attacked, we managed to fend them off. Victoria was hurt, but we're both recovering." "Victoria's hurt?" Will's voice sharpened with concern. "Just bruised. Will, we need to know everything. What should we do?" Quickly, Will related the events of the evening, the capture at the chapel, the revelation of Lord Salford's identity, and the planned ritual for the following evening. "Tomorrow evening?" Isabel's relief was substantial. "We thought it might be tonight. That gives us time to plan." "At the moment the church is deserted," Will explained. "The Foundation members have either gone home or descended to prepare for the ritual. Nathaniel and I are alone down here now. There's a small window near the ground level at the back of the church. It's narrow, but if you could manage to drop something through it." "What sort of something?" Isabel asked. "A crowbar would probably do it. These cages are old iron, and the locks aren't particularly sophisticated. If we could force them open." "We'll find a way, Will. Listen to me. We're going to get you out of there." "The risk is enormous," Will said, "if you're caught." "Then we'll face whatever comes together," Isabel said firmly. "We've come too far to abandon our friends now." "They're going to try to rescue us," he told Nathaniel as awareness of his physical surroundings returned. Nathaniel nodded grimly. "Then we had best be ready. And Will, that was remarkable. How did you manage such clear communication?" Will touched his chest where a warm feeling lingered. "No idea. I think the ladies are being remarkably resourceful." The winter night air bit through their heavy coats as Victoria and Isabel made their way through the darkened streets of Wapping. Victoria carried a leather satchel containing dark lanterns and a substantial crowbar borrowed from Isabel's garden shed. Both women had donned the darkest clothing and most practical boots they could find in Isabel's wardrobe. "I confess," Isabel whispered as they approached the shadowed bulk of St. Joseph's Chapel, I never imagined my spiritual gifts would be employed for breaking and entering." "Desperate times," Victoria replied softly, scanning the area for any sign of guards. "Come, we should head around to the back window." They crept around the building's perimeter, staying close to the weathered stone walls. The chapel loomed above them, its Gothic architecture creating a maze of shadows in the weak moonlight. Behind them, the graveyard stretched away into darkness, the headstones standing like silent sentinels over the sleeping dead. "There," Victoria breathed, pointing to a narrow window set just above ground level. Even in the dim light, they could see that one of the glass panes bore a significant crack. Isabel knelt beside the window, examining the damaged glass. "Well, this appears to be our best chance, if we're very careful." Victoria positioned the crowbar's edge against the cracked pane and applied gentle pressure. The glass gave way with a soft tinkling sound that seemed thunderous in the midnight quiet. Both women froze, listening for any sign that their activities had been detected. When no alarm was raised, Victoria peered through the opening into the basement below. The space was dimly lit by a single gas flame, but she could make out the familiar figures of Will and Nathaniel in their respective cages. "Nathaniel," she whispered urgently. The detective's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he spotted her face in the window. Victoria lowered the crowbar through the window opening, letting it drop to the stone floor with a muffled clang. Nathaniel retrieved it immediately, passing it across to Will's cage. The young engineer examined the lock mechanism with the practiced eye of someone who understood mechanical devices. Within moments, he had positioned the crowbar as a lever and applied careful pressure. The old iron protested with a soft groan, then gave way entirely. Will's cage door swung open, and he immediately moved to free Nathaniel. The second lock proved equally vulnerable to mechanical persuasion, and within minutes, both men were climbing through the narrow window to freedom. The reunion in the shadows behind the chapel was charged with emotion carefully restrained by necessity. Victoria and Will noted the bruising on each other's faces, both marks a reminder of their separate ordeals. "We match," Will said softly, his fingers hovering near Victoria's injured cheek without quite touching it. "If anyone asks, I shall say I have taken up boxing," Victoria replied, her voice containing relief, affection, and worry in equal measure. As they prepared to leave the area, Will suddenly held up a hand. "Wait, we can't leave yet. There is something we need to do. Wait here." Before anyone could protest, he slipped back toward the chapel, returning moments later with a heavy wrench in hand. The others stared at him in some bemusement. Will noted their expressions. "It's my best wrench. I wasn't going to leave it." Despite the gravity of their situation, Nathaniel found himself suppressing a smile. "Of course it is," he said, tapping Will on the shoulder. Dawn was still some way off when the four companions arrived back at Isabel's house. The familiar warmth of the drawing room felt like a sanctuary after their night's adventures, though all of them remained acutely aware that their respite was temporary. "Ladies," Nathaniel said, with a sort of old-fashioned courtesy that came naturally to him, "I believe Will and I should attend to the unpleasant business upstairs while you rest here." Victoria started to protest, but Isabel placed a gentle hand on her arm. "They're quite right, my dear. We've done our part for the moment." The two men ascended the stairs, leaving the women by the fireplace. They returned after 20 minutes, their expressions grim but satisfied. "The immediate problem has been resolved," Nathaniel reported diplomatically. "We've moved them to one of your garden sheds, the one that was already empty of its winter wood supply. Will has also made temporary repairs to the kitchen window." "Thank you both," Isabel said quietly. "I confess I wasn't looking forward to dealing with that particular aftermath myself." Will settled into a chair next to Victoria. "Now we need to determine our next course of action. We have very little time before the ritual begins." Nathaniel spread Harvey's stolen notes across the coffee table. The papers were covered in the doctor's precise handwriting, detailing ritual preparations, timing, and the specific requirements for the 13 sacrifices. Combined with what Lord Salford revealed to us, Nathaniel said, studying the documents, we have a fairly complete picture of their plans. The question is how to stop them. Victoria frowned as she read over the notes. We could contact the police, but sending officers into such a supernatural situation would likely result in their deaths, Will finished. These forces are beyond normal law enforcement capabilities. Isabel had been sitting quietly, her fingers absently touching the outline of the ebon reliquary where it rested in her coat pocket. Perhaps, she said thoughtfully, the reliquary could be used to counter the power of the shard. They're both supernatural artifacts after all. Could the reliquary's power stand up to something as powerful as the shard? Nathaniel asked. Probably not in a direct confrontation, Isabel admitted. The shard appears to command vastly greater cosmic forces. The reliquary only channels the strength of the user. However, it was specifically designed to manipulate spiritual connections. If I could use it to sever Lord Salford's connection to the shard's power. Will nodded slowly. It's not a perfect plan, but it may be our only option. The question is access, Nathaniel said. They'll certainly be expecting us to attempt some kind of intervention. The chapel will be heavily guarded. What about the vicarage? Victoria suggested. When we were investigating Thaddeus Wren, we discovered that underground passage connecting the vicarage to the vault beneath the chapel. If the Foundation is focused on protecting the chapel itself, that could provide an alternate route, Nathaniel agreed. Another option is the storm drains. I overheard some mention that the tunnel to the vault also has an escape route to the sewers, although we'd probably never find our way through that maze. The vicarage it is then, Isabel said with a determination that belied her ethereal appearance. As night gave way to morning, they heard the sound of a key in the front door, followed by familiar footsteps in the hallway. That will be Bradshaw, Isabel explained, punctual as ever. Nathaniel rose from his chair. I have some additional preparations to make to our plans before this evening. We should all return home to rest and gather what we'll need. Victoria offered to stay with Isabel, but their friend shook her head. Now that Bradshaw has arrived, I'll be perfectly safe. Besides, you've done more than enough protecting of me. Go home and rest. You'll need your strength for tonight. As they prepared to leave, each of them was acutely aware that this might be their last peaceful moment together. The weight of what lay ahead, stopping a ritual that could unleash ancient horrors upon the world, pressed down upon them all. The following evening found the four companions gathered in Nathaniel's sitting room. Mr. Rat, sensing the tension in the air, scampered excitedly around their feet. Despite their afternoon's rest, all bore the marks of their recent ordeals. Victoria's bruised cheek had ripened into a spectacular black eye, and Will's jawline showed similar discoloration. They looked, as Isabel observed with dark humour, like a society of pugilists rather than supernatural investigators. I brought these overalls from our previous underground adventure, Victoria said, indicating the practical garments she had worn during their exploration of the storm drains. I thought they might prove useful again. Isabel held up a similar set of clothing with some bemusement. The best I could manage was these gardening overalls borrowed from the servants. I must say, wearing trousers feels remarkably strange. I agree, it does feel rather scandalous, Victoria said, adjusting her borrowed clothes. Our winter coat should conceal the unconventional nature of our attire, Isabel added, wrapping herself in a substantial wool garment. Nathaniel had brought 2 police revolvers, borrowed from Inspector Morrison through channels best left unexamined. He handed one to Will, who accepted it with practiced familiarity. Thank you, Will said, though I'll be bringing my wrench as well. I feel better with it. Isabel patted her coat pocket, where the ebon reliquary rested securely. I've spent the day meditating on its properties. I believe I can channel its power effectively, though the risks remain considerable. As they made their way through the darkened streets toward Wapping, each of them carried their own thoughts about what lay ahead. The enormity of their responsibility pressed down upon them like a physical burden. The vicarage stood dark and apparently empty when they reached it, in stark contrast to the activity visible around the chapel. Lights flickered in the church windows, and shadowy figures could be seen moving about the grounds. All their attention is focused on the chapel, Nathaniel observed. "Perfect for our purposes." He produced a set of keys from his coat pocket. Reverend Shaw was most cooperative when I explained that we might need access to conclude our investigation. He kept a set of keys from his years of service here. The vicarage's interior was cold and dusty, sitting empty since their last exploration. They made their way carefully to the room where they had previously discovered the hidden entrance to the underground passage. But as Will moved to open the concealed door, gas lamps suddenly flared to life around the room, revealing 8 armed men who had been waiting in the shadows. At their centre stood Lillian Langley, her severe expression triumphant. "Good evening," she said with cold satisfaction. "How thoughtful of you to deliver yourselves directly to us." Dr. Harvey emerged from the deeper shadows, his cultured voice carrying notes of smug superiority. "I've been anticipating your arrival all day. Did you really think we wouldn't expect you to attempt some sort of heroic return?" The guards relieved them of their weapons, Victoria's derringer, Nathaniel and Will's borrowed pistols. Fortunately, their search was perfunctory, and they failed to discover the ebon reliquary concealed beneath Isabel's apron. "Miss Strathmore," Harvey continued, "Lord Salford will be so pleased that you've decided to join us after all. True, you won't have time for the proper anointing ritual, but your presence alone will significantly enhance our chances of success. Thank you for bringing her to us," Langley added with malicious pleasure, "though I confess I'm rather looking forward to watching the rest of you witness what comes next." As they were marched down into the underground passages, Victoria managed to catch Isabel's eye and mouth silently. "Good luck." Isabel's slight nod was the only indication that she understood. The ebon reliquary remained their last, desperate hope. The underground chamber beneath St. Joseph's Chapel had been transformed into something from humanity's darkest nightmares. The space, which Will, Nathaniel, and Victoria remembered as simply ancient and ominous, now pulsed with malevolent energy that seemed to make the very air thick and oppressive. 12 figures sat restrained at the ankle around the chamber's perimeter, each one representing the spiritual sensitivity that had marked them for tribute. Among them they recognized Ambrose Fenwick, one of the few to be staring ahead in furious defiance. Victoria also noted Evelyn Popescu from the gala, an older gentleman, another younger woman. Most of the captives looked dejected and afraid. In the chamber's centre, Lord Salford stood upon a raised dais, his aristocratic bearing now tinged with something far more sinister. Before him, an ornate lectern held the Somnus Codex, its pages seeming to move and writhe even when no wind stirred the air. At the base of the dais, a stone altar displayed the massive shard. The artifact's persistent resonance caused Nathaniel to almost wince in pain. Both Salford and Langley, along with several other Foundation members, now wore long robes of deep blue so dark they appeared almost black. Their voices had joined in a low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to resonate in the listeners' bones, creating an atmosphere of mounting supernatural tension. Isabel was escorted to a position among the captives, completing the circle of 13 that the ritual preferred. Victoria tried to catch her friend's eye, offering what encouragement she could through her gaze alone. The remaining companions were positioned at the chamber's rear, where Dr. Harvey stood observing the proceedings with the detached interest of a scientist studying a particularly fascinating experiment. "Are you not joining your colleagues in their ceremonial robes and chanting?" Nathaniel asked, his tone dry. Harvey smiled with a sort of cold amusement that made Nathaniel's skin crawl. "I am not one for such fervour. It is quite an event, though. Surely you agree?" As the chanting grew louder and more complex, the shard became a pulsing shadow that almost hurt to look at directly. The very air around it shimmered with energy that spoke of forces far more ancient than mankind could comprehend. Isabel, standing among the other captives, slowly reached beneath her apron and closed her fingers around the ebon reliquary. The small relic felt warm to her touch, almost eager, as if it too recognized the cosmic forces at work and was prepared to do battle against them. Drawing upon all her training as a medium, all her understanding of spiritual forces and supernatural connections, Isabel raised the reliquary before her and began to focus its power on Lord Salford. Lillian Langley immediately moved to intercept, but Salford raised a dismissive hand. "No," he said, his voice carrying easily over the continuing chant. "Let her make her attempt. It will be instructive for our other guests to see how futile resistance truly is." What followed was a battle of wills fought on planes of existence that normal humans could barely perceive. Isabel, her natural spiritual sensitivity enhanced by the reliquary's power, reached out with tendrils of pure determination toward the connection between Salford and the shard. At first the aristocrat seemed almost amused by her efforts. His confidence was absolute, backed by forces that dwarfed human comprehension. But as Isabel's assault continued, as the reliquary's power focused like a beam of spiritual light upon his defenses, his expression began to change. "Impressive," he admitted, no longer sounding quite so certain, "but ultimately futile." Then he turned the full power of the shard upon her, and Isabel's mind was suddenly flooded with visions that no human consciousness was meant to endure. She saw the vast bulk of Cthulhu stirring in oceanic depths, felt the pressure of cosmic indifference pressing down upon her sanity, witnessed the ultimate insignificance of human civilization in the face of forces that predated the very concept of life as humanity understood it. The reliquary's steady glow began to flicker like a candle in a hurricane. Isabel's face went pale, then grey, and finally she crumpled to the chamber floor, unconscious from the sheer weight of the horror her mind had been forced to contain. "A valiant attempt," Lord Salford said, turning back to the Somnus Codex with renewed confidence. "But nothing is strong enough to stand against such tremendous power." "I disagree," boomed a voice from across the room, loud and firm and utterly unintimidated. "There is something strong enough, your own hubris." The speaker was Ambrose Fenwick. As he spoke, he rose from his position of apparent weakness and submission to one of unmistakable strength and authority. His pale eyes fixed upon the fallen reliquary with the focused intensity of a master craftsman examining his finest tool. "You brought together the most powerful, spiritually sensitive individuals in all of England," Fenwick continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. 13 of us, no less. "Do you not understand the significance of that number? The power that comes from such a confluence of gifted minds?" One by one, the other captives began to stand. An elderly scholar straightened despite his age, a young spiritualist lifted her head with newfound determination, and each of the others followed suit until all 12 stood in unity. "You are not fighting one of us," Fenwick said, and now his voice was joined by others, first 2, then 4, then all 12 speaking in perfect unison. "You are fighting 13. As they spoke, their combined will began to focus upon the fallen reliquary. The small artifact stirred, then lifted from the chamber floor, beginning to glow with a light that had nothing to do with ancient horror, and everything to do with the determined spirit of humanity refusing to bow before forces that would see it destroyed. Lord Salford looked shaken, but not yet truly intimidated. "I count only 12, Mr. Fenwick. Lady Strathmore has no more aid to give." "Then you should count again," Fenwick replied. Salford spun around to see Will stepping forward from the rear of the chamber, breaking free from his guard's restraint to join the circle of spiritual resistance. "You!" Salford snarled. "The henchman?" Will's face was set in lines of cold determination, his pragmatism combining with something deeper. A spiritual connection forged through trials and supernatural encounters that had fundamentally changed his very essence. "I," Will said, his voice joining with 12 others to speak as one, "am an engineer." The second spiritual battle was far different from the first. Where Isabel had fought alone against cosmic indifference, the 13 now stood united in their defiance. The reliquary blazed like a small sun, its spiritual energy matching and challenging the shard's dark power. A wind began to circle the chamber, starting as a whisper, but quickly growing to tempest force. Within the swirling air, points of light appeared, spirits, Will realized, recognizing them as the same ghostly figures they had freed from corruption in the graveyard above. The dead had come to take their revenge upon the artifact that had cursed them. Both reliquary and shard now hung suspended in the chamber's centre, held aloft by opposing forces that made the very air crackle with supernatural energy. The combined power of human spiritual determination battled against dark cosmic forces in a confrontation that threatened to tear reality itself apart. Under the tremendous strain, the reliquary suddenly shattered into 1,000 gleaming fragments. But its destruction seemed to create a feedback effect that sent the shard tumbling to the chamber floor with a sound like a death knell. The Foundation operatives began to panic. Many dropped their weapons and fled toward the exits, their absolute faith of the ancient supremacy shaken by the sight of human spirits standing firm against forces that should have overwhelmed them utterly. Only Dr. Harvey seemed unperturbed by the chaos around them. "Rather exciting, don't you think?" he said conversationally to Nathaniel, as if they were discussing the weather rather than witnessing a battle for the fate of human civilization. Instead of responding, Nathaniel plunged forward into the swirling maelstrom of spiritual energy and managed to reach Isabel, gathering her unconscious form and pulling her to relative safety. Lord Salford, his aristocratic composure finally cracking under the strain, raised his voice above the supernatural chaos. "No, you will not stand in the way of destiny. The great Lord Cthulhu will rise, and humanity will take its proper place as servants to ultimate truth." As he spoke, his form began to change. His carefully maintained human appearance fell away like a discarded mask, revealing something that belonged more to the oceanic depths than to any earthly realm. Tentacles erupted from what had been his face. His skin took on a mottled grey-green colour, and his eyes became vast black pools that reflected depths no human mind should contemplate. But even as this grotesque transformation continued, Ambrose Fenwick's voice rose once more, carrying the power of 13 united wills. "It pains me to surrender something so valuable, Salford," he said, with the sort of aristocratic disdain usually reserved for particularly offensive social lapses, "but at least I'll have the satisfaction of watching your destruction." With the focused power of 13 spiritually gifted minds behind it, the shattered reliquary's fragments suddenly converged upon the fallen shard. The moment they made contact, a psychic explosion of tremendous force shook the entire chamber. The sound of cracking stone filled the air as the structure began to yield. Salford, part man and part abomination, collapsed to the floor. His half-finished transformation had left him a grotesque amalgam of flesh and horror, now twitching feebly where he lay. Langley, her face pale with terror, grabbed the Somnus Codex from its lectern and fled toward the tunnels, followed by the remaining Foundation operatives. The supernatural maelstrom began to subside as the artifact's powers neutralized each other. The captives shook off their spiritual trance and began rapidly freeing themselves from their restraints. "Well," Dr. Harvey said to Nathaniel with undiminished charm, "that was certainly entertaining, but I believe this would be an appropriate time for me to take my leave." "I don't think you will be, Dr. Harvey, and if I may say, I am becoming sick and tired of your oily little voice," Nathaniel replied. Then, with considerable satisfaction, he drove his fist into Harvey's jaw with enough force to send the doctor crashing to the chamber floor, unconscious. "That," Nathaniel said with grim pleasure, "is from Professor Blackwood." Victoria grabbed the neutralized shard from where it had fallen, while Ambrose Fenwick carefully lifted Isabel's unconscious form. Nathaniel, with slightly less gallantry, hoisted the unconscious Harvey over his shoulder. "This way," he called to the others. "Time to leave before this entire structure comes down around our ears." They emerged from the collapsing chamber to find the area around the chapel in controlled chaos. The fleeing Foundation operatives ran directly into a line of armed policemen and a collection of waiting carriages. Inspector Morrison stood at the centre of the operation, his usually impassive face showing considerable satisfaction. Meanwhile, in the underground tunnels, Langley and 2 remaining guards attempted to escape through a passage that led toward the storm drains. But as they reached the junction, they found their way blocked by a wall of lantern light and a group of men, each accompanied by a small dog. A figure stepped forward from the group, a quirky, slender man wearing a battered top hat that he removed and brushed with mock ceremony. "Folks call me Tweaks, ma'am," he said, with elaborate deference. "I'm not much of a reader myself. but I think we'll be looking after that book for you." As Langley and her companions surrendered the Somnus Codex and themselves to Tweaks and his associates, the chamber behind them gave a final groan and collapsed completely, sealing away the vault horror forever. The three friends spoke no words as they watched the Foundation members be solemnly taken away. They shared their triumph quietly as they turned from the church. The world, it seemed, was safe, at least for now. March had brought the first genuine warmth of spring to London. The harsh winter that had seen them through their most dangerous adventure was finally giving way to softer air and the promise of renewal. Victoria, Nathaniel, Professor Blackwood, and Will arrived together at Isabel's Hampstead house in a growler, their spirits considerably lighter than they had been in months. Isabel met them at the door, and while she moved with something of her old ethereal grace, there was a fragility about her that spoke of trials that had left permanent marks upon her spirit. A month by the sea had restored much of her physical health, but her eyes held depths that had not been there before her encounter. "My dear friends," she said, embracing each of them in turn, "it's so wonderful to see you all looking so normal." They settled in the familiar comfort of her drawing room, where early daffodils from her garden brightened the space and seemed to promise that life and beauty could indeed triumph over darkness. "At first I was haunted," she began, as Bradshaw served her guests tea, "haunted with truly terrible visions that my mind couldn't fathom. But then," Isabel said with something approaching her old humour, "what truly disturbed me most was discovering that it was Ambrose Fenwick, of all people, who saved us all. Instead of feeling full of ancient horror, I was just rather annoyed." Victoria laughed, the first truly carefree sound she had made in weeks. "I will never understand the English capacity for being more bothered by social inconvenience than anything else." "It's what makes us resilient," Professor Blackwood observed with a smile. Nathaniel then provided updates on the legal aftermath, though his expression grew troubled as he reached certain aspects of the case. "Langley and the Foundation operatives await trial," he said. "However, I'm afraid Dr. Harvey won't be joining them in the dock." "Why not?" Will asked. "No charges have been filed against him. Given his particular talents for influencing others' minds, we suspect he may have used those abilities to secure his freedom. Regardless of the method, he's gone." "Gone where?" Victoria asked. "The United States. Henry has used his connections to track Harvey's movements. It seems our Dr. Harvey has established a new practice in a town called Arkham in Massachusetts. So Alton therapy lives on, unfortunately beyond our immediate reach." Isabel shuddered slightly. "At least he won't be here to torment Professor Blackwood or anyone else within our sphere." "And before I forget," Nathaniel continued with more pleasant news, "the government has forwarded a rather substantial payment for our services. It's to be divided amongst the 5 of us." Isabel waved a dismissive hand. "I have no need of money. Please divide my portion amongst yourselves." Will stretched comfortably in his chair. "I must say, I'm looking forward to returning to honest mechanical work. I've had quite enough of spiritual nonsense for a lifetime. It will be wonderful to get my hands dirty with engines and machinery again, things that make sense and follow proper physical laws." "And what of your spiritual pursuits, Isabel?" Victoria asked gently. Isabel was quiet for a moment, her fingers unconsciously touching her temple where the memories of horrific visions still occasionally troubled her. "I've received many letters wishing me well, including one rather surprisingly eloquent note from Mr. Fenwick. But I think I need to take a pause from such work. The prolonged use of the reliquary, combined with what I experienced during the ritual, has left impressions that may linger for some time." Professor Blackwood cleared his throat. "The Somnus Codex and the Shard of Nakai, as Harvey calls it in his notes, have been sealed in the most secure vaults beneath the Tower of London, deeper even than where the crown jewels are kept. The chamber at Little Wickham has been permanently collapsed. As for the shard, all tests suggest it's now no more useful than any other piece of rock its size." "If it were up to me," Nathaniel said grimly, "I'd throw that cursed book on a fire and be done with it. Unfortunately, the decision is no longer in our hands, Blackwood replied, though I confess I share your sentiment. Victoria had been sitting quietly, but now she straightened with the sort of determined expression her friends had learned to recognize as significant. I have a small announcement to make, she said. I originally came to London as the beginning of travels through Europe, but I've decided to make my stay permanent. However, I would like to spend part of the summer visiting my family back home. I'm planning a 6-week trip to America. She turned to Isabel with a warm smile. Maybe, if you feel you need some more time to rest, you might consider joining me. The sea air and change of scenery might help cleanse your system of recent influences. Isabel's face brightened with the first genuine enthusiasm she had shown since her ordeal. Do you know, Victoria, I believe that's exactly what I need. A complete change of environment and the company of dear friends. Will's expression fell slightly. I'll miss having you ladies around to keep us grounded. We'll return, Victoria assured him, and something in her tone made Will look up hopefully. The conversation drifted to other considerations of their future. They had neutralized one of the 7 artifacts, but others remained in unknown hands. Dr. Harvey possessed at least one, and the remaining artifacts were scattered across continents, waiting to cause untold havoc in the wrong hands. But that, Nathaniel said firmly, is a problem for another day. For now, we've earned a respite. As the afternoon drew toward evening, Will leant forward and put his hands on his knees. Miss Strathmore, he said, with all the important issues taken care of, there is one more thing I'd like to do. If you would permit, I'd very much like to try your telephone. Isabel's laughter was like silver bells, bright and clear and wonderfully normal after all they had endured. Of course, although after using it myself, I am not sure they will ever catch on. As Will followed Isabel toward her study, Victoria watched them go with affection. Despite the horrors they had faced, despite the supernatural forces that had threatened to tear apart the very fabric of reality, life was reasserting itself. Spring was returning to London, her friends were safe, and the future, while uncertain, held promise rather than terror. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, with courage, and with the unshakable belief that human connection and determination could triumph over even the darkest forces the universe might array against them. Through the window, the London skyline stretched away under a clear spring sky, beautiful and normal and wonderfully, blessedly ordinary. And so our tale concludes, not with cosmic devastation, but with the quiet triumph of human spirit over forces that would have seen our world transformed beyond recognition. The Order of the Sleepless Eye has been defeated, their cosmic ritual prevented, and their artifacts rendered powerless by the combined will of 13 brave souls who refused to bow before alien gods. Until our paths cross again in darker tales and stranger adventures, remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough to save the world. Thank you for joining us on this journey through gaslit streets and supernatural mysteries. A like and subscribe would be most appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Somewhere far from London, beyond the quiet towns and storm-lashed coastlines, the ocean rolls westward under a slate-grey sky, and, beneath its surface, a small procession moves. They walk slowly across the ocean floor, creatures, not quite men and not quite fish, their forms softened by time and salt. They do not speak, they do not turn back. With eyes that have never seen sunlight, they follow a call only they can hear, a call that grows stronger the deeper they go, toward a land they do not know.